Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is the Vulgar Marxist. It is extremely rare for me to have an argument handed to me on a silver platter. The last 4 months have frankly been unprecedented. This video I had originally intended to make some time ago, but realized that I would have to do it almost entirely by allegory. No one was explicitly saying the things I was going to allege they were implying, and so I would have to take multiple different statements by different persons and logically extrapolate the direction the statements would unquestionably take society. In the period since January, however, a staggeringly large number of people have joyfully stepped forward and made my argument for me. At this juncture, I really could just throw up clips and images and call it a video, but I'd like to do more than that for you. Now, before we proceed, this video is going to be somewhat incoherent. I've had a very long day. A lot of things went wrong, so this isn't going to be quite the quality I would like. Nevertheless, I have promised this video to people in the past couple of weeks, and it really does need to get done. So, we proceed with the argument that, one, there is a group of people in favor of what can only be described as Neo-Feudalism, and that a member of that group, specifically Anita Sarkeesian, at the recent VidCon conference called Sargon of Akkad ETA to his face. Before that can occur, it is unfortunately necessary to demonstrate that there are people other than Rochevy who are seriously calling for the replacement of democratic governance with monarchies. Now, this simple quotation might be considered a one-off, a misattribution, or even hyperbole if it weren't for the fact that the individual in question is already passing legislation to make this assertion a reality. That is right, ladies and gentlemen. The new president of France has decided not only to shrink the size of the French legislature by close to a third, but that the legislature should function as a clapping gallery for the policies he has already decided upon. That's not how representative government works. That is how a monarchy works. And as I've already said, it is glaringly obvious that this individual in particular seems to view it as entirely appropriate and reasonable that the nation he has been elected to govern should grant him unilateral and unquestioned authority. Now, before we proceed, there are a few things we have to lay out. Specifically, what exactly feudalism constituted. The founding point of Neo-Feudalism, as anyone who's bothered reading Patriarcha should know, is the idea that a certain group of people has been blessed by God with infinite wisdom and goodness, and is therefore more moral than all other people. These people, being blessed by God with the ability to instantly know everything that could possibly be right or wrong, cannot be questioned, because to question them is to challenge the august will of God, and also the individual questioning has no way to know what right from wrong is, at least not in comparison to the individual who has been blessed by God. The absolute moral authority of sovereigns was for centuries the basis of European society, the idea that the king's word is unquestionable and unchallengeable by anyone because he is morally superior to everyone around him, served to rationalize and justify atrocity after atrocity, because invariably the king was not more moral than everyone around him, nor were any of the royalty male or female. The idea that one group of people is carte blanche more moral than any other group of people is sophistry in the worst form. Which is why the second pillar of Neo-Feudalism, the idea that the king was above the law and therefore not subject to punishment regardless of what moral action he took, because any action must unquestionably be assumed to be right, is so gobsmackingly dangerous. History is replete with people in positions of authority who, for one reason or another, did not believe they were subject to the same rules they had imposed upon everyone else. And the results are inevitably hilarious when it is brought to their attention that they are, in point of fact, subject to those rules. Nevertheless, within society, when people are allowed to behave in a manner morally reprehensible beyond description with little to no consequences, one must infer that either something is grossly wrong or is deliberately intentional that these people be elevated to a station above the rest of society. Nor is this conceptualization limited only to the legal sphere. We are increasingly seeing private companies attempting to assert rules and regulations organized by individuals who blatantly and obviously had no intention of following themselves. Double standards in everything from Twitter throttling accounts by certain individuals to rule sets on GitHub to all manner of malfeasance in every aspect of society. However, what is perhaps most concerning of all is the recent bout of assertions that the laws should be rewritten to favor certain people depending upon their ethnicity or gender. That is, that laws should be subjectively enforced. While moral relativism might potentially have merits insofar as morality is entirely subjective to economic conditions, legal relativism is a recipe for social disaster. Even under anarchist theory, the purpose of abolishing the legislature was to prevent the vagaries of selective enforcement, not double down on them. The reason anarchists advocate what are functionally city-states is that if one region decides to implement laws that are grossly and outrageously unfair to some portion of its population, the population has the option of leaving. This is why anarchists advocate open borders, not as some assault upon national identity or even ethnic identity or any identity at all, but rather to ensure that the laws are just and fair, and if they're not, people can freely move to where they are. Which brings us to the last and perhaps most critical aspect of feudalism, that is its reliance on social status caste hierarchies. I'm not the first, nor indeed the few, who have noticed the fact that the social justice movement relies functionally on the imposition of a caste hierarchy. That is, certain persons are accorded increased benefits over others based on accidents of birth. Now, before we proceed with this assertion, I would like to go into the history of caste hierarchies just for a few moments. They have occurred in very nearly every single continent, from Africa, where people were openly vilified and discriminated against merely for being born into the wrong group, to China, where for centuries people were treated with utter and complete disdain. The situation in India has progressed almost straight up until this day, the government having to pass laws to prevent violence and abuse against certain individuals based upon their historical caste and society. But one of the most pernicious hierarchies was that of Japan. The lower caste in Japan was called eta, which in English translates to human shit. This was not merely a reference to their job, though that was the original reference. They were genuinely regarded as piles of excrement to be thrown away. Beneath contempt, and frequently even beneath notice, the eta suffered for centuries in the most brutal and horrifying conditions imaginable, due largely to the fact that no one cared whether they died or not. Which brings us to a very interesting statement by a particular person in the last couple of weeks.
If you Google my name on YouTube, you get shitheads like this dude who are making these dumbass videos that just say the same shit over and over again. It's like I hate to give you attention because you're a garbage human. It's like I hate to give you attention because you're a garbage human.
Well, that was quite informative, now wasn't it? Sargon is eta. And it's not just Sargon. We have seen a plethora of articles announcing that Caucasian males are the new untouchables, the new caste of people at the bottom of society which no one is permitted to interact with or show the least shred of concern or awareness about. And this isn't merely articles. This is a generalized sentiment throughout society at the present time. Males of low social status have no right to exist, have no right to interact with other people, have no right to an identity at all. They exist entirely to benefit their superiors, and independent of that benefit, their existence is optional. They have no reason to expect to participate in society in any meaningful regard, and frankly, society has no use for them and no reason to accord them the least benefit. I would like to end with a quotation that many by now will recognize as one of my favorites. If society is a banquet laid out for the few, with the many forced to fight for the scraps that fall to the floor, then my goal is not the rearranging of chairs, it is the abolition of the table itself. It should now be glaringly apparent that the movement we are opposing is merely interested in shuffling the chairs.